Well, hello there. How is everyone? I hope you are all well. And I hope you are feeling as amazing as you are looking, because I can tell you now, you are looking absolutely amazing. And I hope that other people are noticing as well, because they bloody well should. Anyway, so we get straight into the meat and potatoes, as I'm going to do a live tomorrow. I'm going to do a live tomorrow night. And the purpose of that live is to talk about specifically prosecutorial misconduct and how we get into a situation where people are wrongfully convicted, shall we say that, and what the top causes of this is. So if you want to see that, make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell. See, I'm new to all this, asking for stuff, asking for, I'm going to start asking for donations soon. Not really, don't worry. But yeah, we're going to be talking about it. So check in on the live Sunday, 10:45 p.m. UK time, which is 5:45 p.m. Eastern. I think that's right. I hope that's right. But what we're talking about now, get on with it, Harsh, I hear you say. Well, what we're talking about now is the smart man. The smart man. And I wonder, right, because look, we have to play it fair. We do have to play things fair. And that is, as much as we can turn around and say, look, Bryan Kohberger, I don't think he's the person who did it. We can turn around and say, I don't think he's the person who did it, because there isn't enough evidence on show for us. And there are questions that need to be answered, which I stand by that. I think if you are somebody who can, hand on heart, say he's guilty, and I would be happy to see him face the death penalty or life imprisonment based on what I've seen, then you're either... No, I'm not even going to go there. You're just wrong. So we just say you're wrong. Now, what I will say is, look, you can be going on a journey and get to a destination. Like, we could get to a destination and Bryan Kohberger could indeed be found guilty. But does that mean that you was right passing him off as guilty at this point in time? And would it make me wrong as a person? I keep whacking my elbows on things. Would it be making me wrong if I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt? Just because we end up in a situation where he is found guilty. Like, if we turned up in a position where he was found innocent, would I hold it against you that you was willing to throw him under the bus so early? I'm not that sort of person, surely. But anyway, look, but to be fair, we have to consider the fact that Bryan Kohberger is somehow connected to this. At the end of the day, his DNA was apparently found on the knife sheath. Now, we could turn around and we could talk about the aforementioned prosecutorial or police force misconduct and say, well, that was planted. It was planted there. And what I will say is, I take the positioning of that sheath very, very important. I feel that it's very important, should I say. Because I think to myself, look, the mechanics of what happened, I think we've touched on this in the past, and we spoke solely about the knife sheath itself. And I think it says a lot about where that sheath was found. It was almost like it was placed to be found underneath one of the victims. I think to myself, how did that happen? At what part of this crime, at what part of this attack did this sheath manage to get under somebody? Under one of the victims. Now, if it had been found on the floor or on the bed, I don't know. It's just something about this sheath being found underneath. And there seems to be, when you read the PCA, it seems to be that perhaps it wasn't found initially and it was found later. And I wonder whether that is the point. And I feel that that could potentially be why many people think that this could have been planted by law enforcement, perhaps. They thought, we'll tuck this here, out of the way, so if people came into this room, say the students who came in here, who had come in earlier, because they had apparently entered the room, forced the door open, seen what was going on. So it makes sense that if this would have been, in the open and seen, then maybe one of them would have seen it. So you've got to cover that base by putting it under, out of the sight of eyes. So that couldn't later on be said, well, we checked all the room, we looked everywhere, and that certainly wasn't there when we was in the room. Do you get what I'm saying? But there is an alternative, and it takes us back to the smart man and Bryan Kohberger, because ultimately, just say that is indeed his DNA on the sheath. It did, in fact, get there somehow. Now, some people will turn around, the skeptics amongst us, and they will turn around and say, but law enforcement perhaps had Bryan Kohberger's DNA and they planted it. Other people will argue, which is a more plausible argument, that is that it just wasn't his DNA. But what if it was? How did it get there? And why was the sheath placed under someone? Now, we've considered Bryan Kohberger a smart man. Now, some people have talked about the perfect crime and Bryan Kohberger eager to be exonerated. People have even said, why isn't Bryan Kohberger screaming from the rooftops, I'm innocent, I'm innocent, I'm innocent? Some people have said about, even I have said, about how he studied this specific area, crime scenes, and what to do and what not to do, what to look for. This was his area of study. Now, what if Bryan Kohberger did have something about him, some kind of darkness inside him, but he did something a little different here? What if it was that he had reached out through his questionnaire and found someone willing to pull the trigger, so to speak? But he had a plan, and that was for them to plant the sheath with his DNA on it. And on this particular evening, he would construct a plan that would make it look like he could have potentially been the person who did it. He would be driving around. He would turn his phone off. All of these things that he should, as an intellect who specializes in this field, be able to understand what things are going to be looked at in terms of an investigation. You can't tell me that Bryan Kohberger didn't think that law enforcement would start looking at cameras in the area and then the broader area. You can't tell me that. You can't tell me that he would not know that they would start pulling up phone records and that he wouldn't consider it a better idea to leave his phone at home if he's at least going to pretend to be at home. Or not drive into Moscow when you're an athlete yourself, quite a good proficient, not prolific, Freudian slip. You know, he's a runner. He could have parked further away and ran in, dressed in black with his mask, everything, brows. And look, this is just me spitballing. This is just me spitballing. But what I constantly struggle with is the idiocy of this case. To believe that this person who had the studies that he had and learnt what he should have learnt, and he was teaching other people, so he was at a standard where he was able to teach his knowledge to others and command a certain degree of result that he would, and we've learned, that he would consistently say is not good enough. He was a harsh grader. Well, to be a harsh grader, you have yourself got to have a certain standard of knowledge to be able to point the finger and say what you're doing is missing something. So are we meant to believe that this person who is able to do this academically would make some fundamental errors in the crime itself? But again, I ask, is there a possibility that this was completely orchestrated and that is why he's not singing from the rooftops? Is that why he asked if anybody else had been arrested? Was he just making sure that the person who did this had not been caught? And the reason they were knocking at the door is because that person had given them Bryan's name. Remember, the only person who can genuinely say about what happened in this and pick out bits that are wrong is the person who did it. And if Bryan Kohberger didn't do it, then he is going to be in a very strong position to understand where law enforcement have gone wrong. And equally, if he knows who did it and how they did it, he will know where law enforcement went wrong. And again, I'm not saying that Bryan Kohberger is innocent. I'm not saying Bryan Kohberger is guilty. But is Bryan Kohberger genuinely that stupid that he would have made the mistakes that he made that night? And this knife sheath, are we truly saying that in the throes of the chaos that this sheath just did happen to land up underneath one of the victims. Because I want you to try and figure out how that works in your head. Why they'd leave it there. Why he would have left that house and left that sheath there. He would have known. I've said this before. He would have known he didn't have it. Dylan Mortensen claims that she was a witness. She's claiming she was a witness, but she didn't say that she saw someone leave brandishing a weapon. Didn't mention it. So did he walk out of the house holding it? And when you get to a point and you think, sheath, you're not leaving without it. I don't care what anyone says. And in reality, the harsh reality is he didn't have that many places where he would have had to have looked for it. There was 2 rooms. 2 rooms. And at that stage, he would have had the knowledge of knowing what he did and where to look. I can't see him leaving without it if he left knowing it was gone. Let me know down below. Could this have been something that was orchestrated? Is there a bigger picture to it? And is, in fact, Bryan Kohberger a lot smarter? And are there clues and nuances to what we're seeing that would suggest, perhaps, that this was indeed some form of plan all along to get away with a crime? And maybe it wasn't about getting away with the crime that you committed yourself, but that you had facilitated in having done. And I want you to think before we go away, who could that person have been who was weaponized? Who could have been that person? And I'm sure if you think about it very, very carefully, I'm sure that a lot of you will be able to put a name down below in the comments. I'll catch you all in the next one.